All right, we should be live. This is the next Ubuntu Online Summit for 1406. Topic being working with Vagrant and Juju together. With me again, we have Matt Gruzek, who's a Juju Charmer, and Charles Butler, who's also a Juju Charmer, and Vagrant Master Tamer. So I guess I'll go ahead and hand over the session to Chuck. He's going to walk you through everything you need to know about Juju and Vagrant.
All right, greetings everybody. For those of you that don't know, Vagrant is a Ruby app that was developed to assist developers in creating and interfacing with Virtualbox-based virtual machines to rapidly iterate on system configuration. So to get started, I want to start with the introduction of how to fetch Vagrant, how to get your environment set up, and work through the first basic steps of getting started in this ecosystem. Now, the Juju team publishes a Virtualbox base box image file that you can fetch and install into your Vagrant installation, but as a precursor to that, you do need to go fetch Vagrant, and you can fetch that from vagrantup.com. And I would recommend using the latest upstream version, as there have been quite a few changes between the revisions that aid and assist you in interfacing with Virtualbox. Now, Vagrant does support multiple providers. It works with VMware, and I believe that there's also been some Hyper-V and some cloud stuff that's been added to it. But to kind of scope this, we've only published a Virtualbox-based image, so that would be a great place to get started. Now, if you're a community member and you want to contribute back and you have experience with this, we do welcome community contributions. And to touch a little bit on that, there is a Launchpad project for this. It's launchpad.net/juju-vagrant-images. And subsequently, if you also run into some paper cuts or have some issues, this is also a great place for you to go and file bugs. So, stepping back into the documentation, once you have installed Vagrant from vagrantup.com, the next step to go through is to also install a supporting utility called sshuttle, and that's available from GitHub. And the link for that is, I believe it's towards the bottom. Oh, I'm looking at the straight docs. Let me look at Vagrant, and it should be listed here. Talks about Node.js, fetching it. Sshuttle is an optional project. We don't have a link here, but I'll make sure that we update that after this track. So the purpose behind that is it will allow you to create a VPN network into your virtual machine and interface with the services that you're deploying using Juju Local inside of your Vagrant machine. So without any further ado, we're going to talk about how to actually fetch the boxes and get this installed into your system. So I'm going to cover this and say Vagrant tag version. It's going to tell you that I'm running 1.4.3, which is not the latest, but it's only a couple minor revisions behind. Another thing that you'll need to have is Virtualbox, and that's available via just sudo apt-get install Virtualbox. And this also works on Mac OS X as well, so you'll want to use the supporting brew commands, which would be brew install Vagrant, and I believe that you still have to manually install Virtualbox due to the licensing scenario there. But that's all available from virtualbox.org. So once you've got your two components installed in your machine, the next step from that is to actually fetch the Juju box. And if you're looking at the Juju docs, we have them listed right here underneath the subheading of choosing boxes. And I would recommend that you start off with the 14.04 LTS boxes. That's been the current focus of our development cycle in the Vagrant experience itself. So I'm going to fetch the AMD64 box, and the command is vagrant box import, and then you're going to want to give it a name. I would recommend that you give it just Juju box, so that way it's easy for you to remember, and then you're going to paste that URL into your command line. And what Vagrant's going to do is it's going to reach out and fetch that box file, put it in the proper location, and get it registered within Vagrant's registry itself. So if you type vagrant box list, once that command is completed, that will list out all of your boxes, tell you what provider it is, and give you the box name. So I've got a precise box here that I've just titled Juju box, and I have a trusty box titled Trusty Juju box. So I'm going to create a temporary directory here off of my current path, and we'll type vagrant init trusty Juju box, And what this is going to do is it's going to create a boilerplate Vagrant file that Vagrant reads to spin up and provision your machine. And this is where you can place specific tweaks into your virtual machine, such as adding more RAM to the installation itself. So if you want to increase the RAM, which I would highly recommend, by default it's going to give you 1 GB of RAM. And as we all know, that we can fill that up pretty quickly once we start deploying services. I would say a bare minimum of 2+ is what you're going to want to use to get started. So the command for that you add here, I believe, should be down here. And I'm just going to add this right below my config VM box and say config.vm. I think it's customize. 1 second while I validate that. More configuration. Yep. Config.vm.mem size equals 2048. So, taking a look through this, there's also a few other options that we could have here. So, say for example, we want to use a different box, or we want to distribute just this Vagrant file to a friend so that way they can get started quickly. What you would do is you would take this config.vm.box URL and you would place the path to our Vagrant box listed on the Juju documentation directly in this. And that would look like so. So if they don't have that box currently imported, that will automatically tell Vagrant to go ahead and reach out and fetch this box and import it as the name configured with config VM box. You can also tweak your private network so that we don't have collisions. And there are some other interesting things here that are specific to Vagrant, but we're not going to touch on those as that gets into a little bit more of the advanced side of using Vagrant for our purposes. So once we've configured our Vagrant file, the next step is to actually start the virtual machine. And I'm going to type Vagrant up, and it's not mem size. Oh, I'm batting 1,000 today. So, in the interest of time, I'm just going to comment that out and issue Vagrant up. And what this is going to do is you're going to see that it's going to import your box. It's going to go through a bootstrapping phase where it goes through a bunch of provisioner statements. And you'll see output that resembles the following, where you've got red and green mixed output, and it's going to tell you exactly what it's doing. It boots the virtual machine. It fetches the Juju packages. It boots up a Juju local installation, and then installs the Juju GUI, deploys the Juju GUI to the environment, and sets up an intermediary redirect service so that way you can reach right into the Juju GUI directly from your desktop. And the final bits of the output, it's going to say from the browser on your host, you should be able to access the GUI by going to this URL. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up localhost 6080. And what you'll see is that this pulls it up, and our password is listed here in the output, but it's also interesting to note that the password is also listed here at the bottom of the GUI login screen. So you can just copy and paste that, put it in the password field, and we're brought to our Juju GUI. So at this point, a lot of things have happened without us having to do anything. We didn't have to go through any setup. We didn't have to do anything overly complex. We just issued Vagrant up, and we have a complete running Juju local installation for us to start interacting with and potentially start development or just testing Juju itself. So in order to validate that, I'm going to issue Vagrant SSH. And what that's going to do is it's going to place me inside of that virtual machine over an SSH session, and I can validate that everything has happened for me by just issuing Juju status. And this command shows that I have 2 machines listed, my Bootstrap node, as well as the LXC container that it spun up to run the Juju GUI. Now, another interesting thing to note is that there's also a directory mapping from my host system that is going to be available to me in this virtual machine. So if I issue tree, I see that I've got a directory structure here of charms that goes into my different series with the charms warehoused right off of the root where my Vagrant file is located. So if I go back into Vagrant SSH and I cd to /vagrant, and when I look here, I see that everything that I have available to me in my host system is also available to me in this directory path within my Vagrant box. So why does that matter to me as a charm author? What this means is that I can work on my host system on my charms and tweak and tune settings and rapidly iterate upon the charm code and then re-execute that inside of my Vagrant environment. So to get started with this, let's just deploy something. Let's go ahead and deploy a single MongoDB instance. All right, and that's going to take a couple minutes to show up as it goes through its deployment phase and provisioning. And I'm going to watch Juju status while that happens. And I'm also going to create another session, and I'm going to seed into charms. Precise Genghis app. Open up Sublime. And on my parent system, I'm going to look at a charm that will directly interface with MongoDB. Now, if you're not familiar with Mongo and Genghis, that's okay. I chose these charms just because they're very simple and they deploy quickly and it's easy to interface with. Now, in the interest of time, I decided not to do relationships with the Genghis app since it is a standalone service that runs in a browser and allows you to connect to a MongoDB instance to view your documents and do some basic system administration tasks. So, looking through it, this is very typical. It's got all of the hooks that you would expect to see in a charm. I've got an installation hook that sets up a few things. Now, I'm doing something heinous here, which is running a service as root, but please don't do that in your production charms. So, looking at config changed, we just stop and start the service. We also have a website relation change, so if we wanted to add this to an HA proxy setup, for example, in production. And all of this fits together in the terms of this is what I would expect to see as a charm developer. I have all of the amenities available to me of my host operating system. I'm able to use my favorite editor. I'm not limited to just using by inside of an SSH terminal. This gives me a very natural look and feel to how I want to interact with my system and how I would expect the development workflow to work. And I also have the ability to run this on different systems, such as if I were on Mac OS X, maybe my favorite editor is TextMate. So I get to work in my editor, I get to work in my native file tools such as Finder, and everything that I do translates naturally into my virtual environment thanks to Vagrant spinning this up for me. Looks like my machine's still pending. So with that being said, and I have this directory structure here available for me, if I want to deploy the charm that I'm working on in my parent operating system into my Vagrant environment, you can specify local charms. So the way to do that would be Juju deploy, and then you specify the repository on the command line. So be tac repository equals /vagrant /charms, and then I would say local. I specify the series, precise, and then Genghis app. Oh, because I typoed it. Okay. And what we see here is that it has added Genghis app to my deployment canvas, and we're going to wait for these to come online so that we can start interfacing with them. But I'd also like to take this opportunity while we pause and we wait for these machines to come online. If anybody has any questions about how to get started with this or basic interfacing with it that they feel like I've blown through, feel free to prefix it with a question. This. I'm going to step back. I did want to temp. This is what I was looking for. All right, so to predate back to something that we started with is increasing our Virtualbox memory size. There is actually a commented out section of the config file, or the Vagrant file, that tells you that you can VB customize this modified VM. Now, this is natural Ruby, so you're going to have to uncomment the entire block, where it starts with the config VM provider into this do, all the way down to this end statement. And what this will do is that whenever it actually spins up your virtual machine, it's going to communicate with Virtualbox and increase your memory size from 1 gig to 2 gigs. And you can scale this out to as much RAM as you have in your system. And brilliant, it looks like MongoDB came online. Let's take a look at why Genghis app failed. Now, I did this intentionally because I wanted to show some of the debug cycle that you're going to go through within Virtualbox. So recall that we are in an SSH session into the Vagrant machine. And what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to say Vagrant, or I'm sorry, I'm going to say Juju debug hooks Genghis app /0, and this is going to drop me into a tmux session within this LXC container running inside of the virtual machine, and it's going to present me with a nondescript interface at this moment. And I'm going to click on this charm in the GUI. I'm going to choose it. I'm going to choose retry, and what this is going to do is it's going to attempt to re-execute the hook that failed. So now if I run hooks install, it's going to tell me that Ruby's already installed. Great. We go into the next step, which is installing Genghis app and the bson extension. And as you see here, we're running these hooks interactively, so this allows me to really deep dive into what my installation routine is doing and identify problems that are happening with it. And what I see here is that it's picked rake coming from the system rake, which is 1.8. So in order for me to upgrade this, I need to sudo gem install rake. All right. Let's re-execute our installation hook. All right, brilliant. Our installation hook is now completed successfully. Type exit. It's going to bring up the next hook in the execution sequence, which would be config changed, and I can now run that interactively as well. And cool. Looks like there is an issue with upstream Genghis app now. Is 1.8. Nope, we are still targeting Ruby 1.8. So what is it? Switch. Been doing entirely too much Python recently, Matt. I've forgotten some of my Ruby. All right, and I want to use Ruby 191. This is 2. All right. And now let's rerun this. Hooks config changed. And it's still targeting 1.8. And do something heinous here and rerun hooks install.
It says 1.93 is already installed in the latest version.
Right, I'm thinking that whenever it ran through the gem install, it was still using system Ruby, so that's actually a bug in the charm. And what I should do is update my hook file for install to run this update alternatives. And I would set that somewhere in here, so that way it automatically switches it to Ruby 191 for me, which is very insightful. And now that I've made that change, if I were to cat hooks install, I don't see the change reflected because I'm inside the LXC container. Now, however, if I were to remote back into the Vagrant machine, now I'm kind of jumping around here, so this may be a little confusing. What I've done is I've gone from my host into the Vagrant machine now, and I'm going to cat/vagrant charms precise Genghis app install. I'm sorry, hooks install. And I'll see that my update alternatives line did make it through into the virtual machine. So to kind of recap, I edited on my host, It's now available on my virtual machine. Now, within this context, I'm still running the existing or the deployed charm code. So what I would need to do is I would need to update my charm to get that reflected in the changes.
Right.
So it looks like our config change hook exited successfully. And now when I run hook start, still targeted 1.81. Awesome. How does that happen? Man, I cannot win today. Yeah, there's something. What other issue do I have here? It's fine about the BSON extension gem, but the fact that it's targeting Ruby 1.8 is bothering me. Sinatra mustache. So system Ruby, so I need to update alternatives gem. .3, and it's not registered as an alternative.
You have to list. I think you have to. Yeah, let's see if I can pull that up for you. I think you have to. Like list it with them first, with update alternatives, and then you can set it. Add maybe. Oh, where is it?
Okay, so we've listed gem, and I targeted what 193, and it wants 191 is what it's showing in the list.
Oh.
All right, so that's another thing that we can add to our hook code. All right. All right, let me rerun install one more time. Rerun config changed. Rerun starts. Hey, all right. Solving issues one step at a time. Now when we exit, everything should be good to go. At this point, if I were to leave my debug hook session, and I need to go back to my parent operating system, and I'm ready to validate that my installation and deployment has worked. So looking in the Juju GUI, I am going to pull the IP address out of Genghis app. And it says the port 80 is exposed. Now, if I click on this, it's not going to do anything for me. We see that it's trying to reach out over the local network. And this is an unroutable IP for me, because this is being run inside of the virtual machine. So what I need to do is on the Juju documentation, we state that there is a shuttle command. And I'm not going to use this one. I'm going to say shuttle tac-r vagrant at localhost 2222. And I want to forward all of the 10.0.3.0 traffic through this tunnel. And I've got mismatch quotes.
Don't you have to give it a CIDR? Like /20.
And it should be shuttle. If I had it installed, that would be great. Say yes, continue connecting. And it's going to prompt you for the Vagrant password. Now, by default in Vagrant images, the Vagrant user password is just Vagrant. And you're not going to see a whole lot of output after that. It's just going to say that it's connected. So what this has done is it's established kind of a VPN-style connection into my virtual machine, so that way I can reach the machines that are deployed within that network. Now, we see that the Genghis GUI has responded, and this is great. So, in the interest of validating that everything is together, let's pull up MongoDB. Let's pull the IP off of this unit, and let's connect to that using Genghis. 37017, and we pull this up, and Brilliant. We have connected to the Mongo database running on our MongoDB machine. We're now free to add a database. We're going to create foo. Inside of foo, I am going to create a collection that is awesome. And inside of awesome, I'll add a document that is Juju is and value amazing. Done. In just 10 short minutes, you can go from a base system to having Virtualbox installed, being able to interface with the Juju environment, and having all the amenities to interact with this system as demonstrated on a POSIX compliant system. So with that, that's kind of started the story. Do you have any questions, Matt, about how to interface with Vagrant and Juju?
No. So well, I guess I do. So this would be a workflow for macOS developers to use Juju. Is that right?
Correct. This would actually work for Windows as well as macOS.
Is that right? Okay.
However, Windows users are going to run into a few more hurdles to jump through, such as S-Shuttle itself requires Node.js to run on Windows.
Okay.
And we do outline that in the Vagrant documentation that we have on juju.ubuntu.com/docs.
Okay. I have to buy a Mac box now, a PowerBook or whatever they call them.
Yeah, I tell you, this is actually how I got started interfacing with Juju before I joined the Juju team. Was I was using a MacBook Air, and
Nice.
Vagrant was kind of my savior in this because I didn't want to pay high cloud bills. You know, I mean, granted, Juju works with a lot of clouds, and Amazon being the one that I was most familiar with getting started. But the bill that comes associated with that was a bit steep for development. So
Sure. So the Vagrant image is using LXC containers, but you're using VirtualBox to host the Vagrant image, right?
Right. Mac OS X has it's kind of an operating system kernel limitation where they don't support containerization.
Mm-hmm.
So by using VirtualBox to boot an Ubuntu image, we gain all the amenities of almost running Ubuntu natively. Now, you're still running through a hypervisor, so there are a few slowdowns, but you don't notice it as much as you would think. So it's a great way to get started, especially if you're just interested in looking at it and you don't want to integrate with the public cloud. You just say, hey, I want to see what this does in Juju, and I don't want to have all this investment time. So just spin up the virtual machine and start deploying services and see what it can offer for you.
That's really cool. That you demonstrated that it's very easy and quick to get to that point where you're deploying services on Ubuntu system. So that's great.
I'd also like to call out that if you are looking at doing this, into doing the Vagrant machine-based development workflow, that everything that you learn through the tutorials that we have published with just interfacing with Juju, these translate one-to-one with what you're doing inside of the Vagrant virtual machine, outside of a couple things such as adding the S-Shuttle step so you can VPN into it. So it does add one or two more things to do, but outside of that, you've got everything, and all the utilities, the apt packages, and whatnot are exposed to you for your consumption.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
To talk a little bit about some of the future of this project, I've been working with a community member by the name of Sebastian, and he's been really excited about this, and he's looking to contribute back to the Vagrant story a bit, and we're working in tandem to get a Vagrant plugin for Juju, so that way you don't even have to run the Vagrant SSH. Once you run basically Juju Vagrant setup, is that it'll deploy your Vagrant file, and it'll start moving things around for you to kind of ease that user setup and make it all kind of a fluid experience. And by the fact that Juju exposes these hooks for you to introduce plugins into it, we're looking at making a real seamless experience. So if anybody is interested in that, feel free to join us in irc.freenode.net and pound Juju. And just ping myself. I'm Lazy Power, and I'll be more than happy to introduce you to the conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome. That'd be even more integrated would be awesome. Cool. All right.
All right, I'm going to reach out over the chat room and see if anybody's got any questions. Let's talk about troubleshooting this a little bit. So you started using Vagrant in your workflow, and it's getting close to end of day, and you're thinking, man, I'm done. I don't want to lose all this progress that I've done. So you issue Vagrant shutdown.
Mm-hmm.
Because you expect it to just spin back up and do everything as it should. Well, that is an area that we're looking to fix. Is that what's going to happen is it will sever your connection to the Juju GUI. And I did notice that you can set this back up by rerunning Vagrant provision. However, that is not recommended. What's going to happen is the existing Vagrant provisioner scripts are very judicious in destroying any existing Juju environments that are there. So while you will get all the amenities set back up for you, it will reset up the forwarding and deploy the GUI. What's going to happen is that your existing Juju environment is going to go away. So make sure at the end of the day, whenever you're done working with the Vagrant box and you want to preserve your work, that you issue Vagrant Suspend. And what this will do is it's going to take a snapshot of your virtual machine. Whenever you come back in the next day, you just Vagrant resume, and it'll spin everything back up for you in the exact same state that you left it.
That's a good tip.
I like how straightforward this is. It was extremely quick to cover the content.
Yeah.
All right, I would like to reiterate that if you're having issues with the Vagrant images, that feel free to reach out to us over the mailing list at juju@list.ubuntu.com. You can join irc.freenode.net and reach out to anybody in Pound Juju. Or you can also file bugs at the issue tracker at launchpad.net/juju-vagrant-images.
Cool. All right. Thank you a lot, Charles and Matt. Stick around. I think we have one more session for the day, and that'll wrap it up for the week. So see you guys then.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.